Beneath the fractured moon, where silver light bled into the veins of ancient stone, the priestess whispered her curse not as vengeance, but as the earth's own verdict. Avalyn Roar stood at the edge of the royal arena, her bare feet sinking into the frost-kissed sand that glittered like shattered oaths under the winter sky. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine smoke and iron, torches flickering along the high walls, their flames dancing shadows across the faces of the gathered throng. It was the night of the blood moon, when the Deuce's gaze turned sharpest on the corrupt, and the northern winds howled through the Colosseum's arches like the lament of forgotten gods. At 33 winters, Avalyn had once been the voice of the lunar temple, her words woven with the threads of prophecy and balance. Now, she was stripped of her robes, clad only in a threadbare shift that clung to her skin like a second betrayal, her dark hair unbound and wild against the chill. The king's corruption had festered like a wound in the heart of the realm. Whispers of poisoned rivers, matriarchs exiled for speaking truth, and alliances forged in shadowed blood pacts had reached even the temple's sanctum. Avalyn had condemned him openly, her voice rising in the great hall like a thunderclap. The crown that devours its roots invites the storm to uproot all. It was no mere accusation. It was the oath of equilibrium, the ancient pact binding ruler to the wild's mercy. For that, the Alpha King, Edric the Unyielding, whose guilt-ridden eyes had once sought her counsel in secret, had branded her a blasphemer. An outcast Omega, they called her now, though her blood sang with the old magic, untamed and unclaimed. The crowd's roar swelled as the guards prodded her forward, their spears glinting in the torchlight. Rough hands gripped her arms, the metal of their gauntlets biting into her flesh, drawing thin lines of blood that traced warm paths down her skin. She did not struggle. What was exile if not the soul's first unraveling? The arena below yawned like a maw, its depths shrouded in twilight, where the ancient lion's den awaited. Legend spoke of it as the Deuce's trial, beasts born of shadow and fang, guardians of truth who devoured the false-hearted. Avalyn's heart pounded, not with terror, but with the quiet certainty that her path had always led here, to the brink where faith met fang. They dragged her to the iron gate, its bars etched with runes that glowed faintly under the moon's scrutiny. The king himself loomed on the royal dais, his silhouette framed by banners of deep crimson and frost-white fur. Edric's face was a mask of regal stone, but Avalyn knew the cracks beneath. The weight of decisions that had cost him his mate, his heir, his soul. He had rejected her warnings as weakness, yet in his eyes now flickered something deeper. Guilt, perhaps, or the ghost of what might have been. "Let the beasts judge what the crown cannot," he intoned, his voice carrying over the wind-swept expanse. The crowd echoed his decree, a thunder of approval laced with the metallic tang of anticipation. The gate groaned open, a beast awakening from slumber. Cold air rushed up from the pit, carrying the musky scent of fur and earth, mingled with the faint coppery promise of blood. The guards shoved her forward, and Avalyn stumbled into the dimness, the iron clanging shut behind her like the final seal on a prophecy. Darkness enveloped her, broken only by slivers of moonlight piercing the grated ceiling high above. She straightened, her breath steadying as she took in the den, walls of jagged rock veined with ice, the floor a mosaic of claw-scratched stone and scattered bones that whispered of past judgments. In the shadows, eyes gleamed, golden orbs, unblinking, belonging to the pride that prowled this underworld. They rose as one, massive forms uncoiling from the gloom. The lead lioness, her mane a cascade of shadowed gold, padded forward with a low growl that vibrated through the stone, stirring the fine snow that dusted the corners like forgotten ash. Avalyn's pulse quickened, the chill seeping into her bones, but she did not flee. Instead, she stepped into the faint pool of torchlight spilling from above, her voice emerging soft yet unyielding, reciting the oath as her ancestors had before the first kings bent knee to the wild. By earth and fang, by moon and vein, the balance holds what crowns profane. Let no root be severed in vain, or the storm shall claim the throne's domain. The words hung in the air, laced with the subtle hum of her hidden gift, the Pathfinder's whisper, a dawn of sight that revealed destinies woven in blood and starlight. The lioness paused, her massive head tilting, nostrils flaring as if tasting the truth in Avalyn's scent. One by one, the pride stirred. A young male with scars like lightning across his flank lowered his gaze. An elder, grizzled and wise, turned aside with a rumble that echoed like distant thunder. They did not lunge, they parted. A path formed through the den's heart, a corridor of lowered heads and watchful eyes, the beast's breaths steaming in the frigid air. Avalyn walked it, her steps measured, the cold sand shifting beneath her feet like the realm's own shifting loyalties. Above, the crowd's roar faltered into murmurs, then silence, as moonlight bathed her form in ethereal silver. She was no prey, she was the verdict made flesh. The lion's deference was no miracle, it was revelation, damning the king more surely than any curse. For in cursing him, Avalyn had not blasphemed. She had unveiled the fracture in his rule, the guilt that gnawed at his alpha's heart like winter's unrelenting bite. As she reached the far wall, a hidden grate yielding to her touch under the moon's approving gleam, Avalyn glanced back. The pride watched, guardians unbound, their eyes reflecting the fire of truths yet to burn. Exile was not her end, but her beginning, a rejection that carved space for redemption's flame. And in the king's distant gaze, she saw the first shadow of pursuit, the weight of a destiny that would draw them inexorably together. The hidden grate gave way with a sigh of rusted iron, spilling Avalyn into a labyrinth of forgotten tunnels beneath the arena. The air here was thicker, laced with the damp rot of earth and the faint, acrid bite of old blood, as if the stones themselves remembered every trial they had swallowed. Moonlight filtered through cracks high above, casting elongated shadows that twisted like the fingers of the Dusa, urging her onward. Her shift, torn and bloodied from the guard's grip, clung to her like a shroud. But the chill that seeped into her bones was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest, the echo of rejection that had stripped her bare before the beasts and the crown alike. She moved through the passages with the instinct of one who had long communed with the wild's hidden veins, her bare feet silent on the uneven stone, each step a quiet defiance. The lion's parting had not been mercy. It had been acknowledgement, a ripple in the balance she had sworn to uphold. Yet as she pressed deeper, away from the muffled roar of the crowd above, doubt coiled in her gut like winter fog. What refuge waited in exile? The northern wilds beyond the city walls were a realm of blizzards and prowling packs, where outcasts like her became prey to the very forces she once guided. Her Pathfinder's gift stirred faintly, a whisper of paths unseen, destinies branching like frost on glass. But it offered no comfort, only the weight of truths yet to unfold. The tunnel widened into a cavernous chamber, its walls veined with ice that gleamed like frozen tears under a shaft of lunar light piercing the ceiling. Torches had long guttered out here, but the moon's glow sufficed, illuminating a makeshift camp. Furs strewn across the stone, a half-drawn map etched into the frost, and the remnants of a fire pit where embers smoldered, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. Avalyn froze, her breath catching in the frigid air. She was not alone. From the gloom emerged a figure, broad-shouldered and cloaked in shadow, his movements labored, as if each step warred with an unseen wound. Edric, the Alpha King, stepped into the light, his face etched with lines deeper than the scars of battle, guilt's relentless carving. His dark hair, streaked with premature silver, fell unkempt across a brow furrowed in torment, and his eyes, once steel-gray and commanding, now burned with a feverish intensity, shadowed by the curse that had shadowed his reign. Blood seeped through the bandages at his side, staining the royal fur of his cloak a deeper crimson, the metallic scent mingling with the smoke of dying embers. He was no conqueror here, but a fugitive in his own underbelly, fled from the dais where he had condemned her, driven by the fracture her words had exposed. Their gazes locked, and the air thickened, charged with the instinctive pull of Alpha and Omega, a primal thread that tugged at Avalon's core, unbidden and fierce. It was not desire, not yet, but recognition, the Earth's own current, binding the broken to the burdened. Fear flickered in her chest, sharp as the wind's howl echoing distantly through the tunnels, for this was the man who had cast her into the den, his betrayal a blade that still twisted in her soul. Yet curiosity bloomed alongside it, a cautious flame, drawn to the vulnerability in his stance. The way his hand hovered near his wound, not in threat, but in quiet surrender. "You," he rasped, his voice a gravelly echo of the throne's thunder, laced with pain and something perilously close to awe. He did not advance, but his scent enveloped her, musk and pine, undercut by the sour tang of blood and isolation. The lions. They bowed. How? Avalon's heart thundered, a visceral rhythm that mirrored the distant uivos of the wild beyond the city. She should flee, vanish into the shadows as the outcast she was, leaving him to his rot. But the oath lingered on her tongue, its words a bridge she could not burn. "The balance you shattered demands witness," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the cold gnawing at her exposed skin. "Not blasphemy, Edric. Prophecy. The Deusa does not suffer the profane to command her beasts." He winced, not from the wound, but from the truth's sting, his frame sagging against the cavern wall. The moonlight caught the silver torque at his throat, an ancient band of lunar runes, symbol of the crown's pact with the wild, now dulled by neglect. It was the story's emblem, recurring like a heartbeat, the torque that bound King to nature, now a chain of his own making. Guilt etched his features as he met her eyes again, the connection sparking like flint on steel, instinctive, undeniable, yet he denied it with a shake of his head. "I am cursed, priestess, not by your words but by my own. The river's poisoned because I allied with shadows to save the realm from war. My mate, lost to betrayal I could not prevent. And now you walk free while I bleed in hiding, pursued by rivals who scent my weakness." The admission hung between them, raw as the wound he pressed, and Avalon felt the pull deepen, a curiosity laced with reluctant empathy. Fear warred within her. To approach was to invite recapture, to entwine her fate with his tainted one. Yet the Pathfinder's whisper urged her forward, revealing glimpses, flashes of his solitary flight through these tunnels, evading assassins sent by a rival alpha who coveted the throne. He was no monster, but a king fractured by duty's cruel arithmetic, his melancholy a mirror to her own exile. She stepped closer, the stone cold beneath her feet, the ember's warmth a faint promise against the encroaching frost. "Curses are not forged in isolation," she murmured, her hand hovering near his arm, not touching, but near enough to feel the heat radiating from his fevered skin. "What enemy hunts you here in your own depths?" Edric's breath hitched, the air between them humming with unspoken tension, the denial of the bond that stirred, rationalized as mere survival's illusion. But in his eyes, curiosity mirrored hers, a spark amid the guilt storm. As footsteps echoed faintly from the tunnels, pursuers closing in, their worlds collided. Fear and fascination forging the first fragile link in the chain of redemption. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The footsteps echoed closer, a staccato rhythm slicing through the cavern's hush like arrows loosed in the dark. Avalyn's instincts flared, the Pathfinder's gift sharpening the shadows into premonitions, cloaked figures, blades drawn, their scents a foul mix of sweat and foreign steel, assassins from the rival Alpha's pack, scenting blood in the underbelly of the arena. Edric tensed beside her, his hand dropping to the hilt of a concealed dagger, but pain twisted his features, the wound at his side weeping fresh crimson onto the stone. He was no match for them alone, king or not, and in that moment, the instinctive pull between them twisted into something sharper, survival's raw demand. "Hide," she whispered, her voice a thread of urgency woven with the chill air, grabbing his arm to steady him as she pulled him toward the far wall. His skin burned under her touch, fever hot against her cold fingers, and the contact sent a jolt through her, unbidden, like the moon's tide stirring dormant waters. She rationalized it as necessity, nothing more, the Omega's curse to mend what Alpha's broke. But the warmth lingered, a treacherous comfort amid the encroaching threat. The cavern offered scant mercy, a narrow crevice behind a jutting outcrop of ice-veined rock, barely wide enough for two. Avalyn shoved him into it first, his broad frame scraping against the jagged edges, eliciting a stifled grunt of pain. She followed, pressing close in the confined space, her back to the cold stone, his body shielding hers in the dimness. The silver torque at his throat caught a stray beam of moonlight, its runes pulsing faintly like a heartbeat, a reminder of the pact now frayed between them. Up close, his scent enveloped her fully, pine and blood, undercut by the musk of exhaustion, and she fought the urge to lean in, to draw strength from the Alpha's presence that her blood inexplicably craved. They held their breath as the intruders entered the chamber, three shadows materializing from the tunnel's maw. Their boots crunched on scattered bones, eyes scanning the ember's glow with predatory focus. "The King's Trail ends here," one growled, his voice rough as gravel, accented by the Southern Pack's guttural tones. "Rorik's orders, no survivors, the priestess too, if she's slithered this way." The mention of the rival Alpha, Rorik the Shadowed, whose ambitions had poisoned the rivers and fractured alliances, sent a chill deeper than the frost. He was the architect of Edric's guilt, the betrayer who had slain the queen in a bid for power, leaving the realm's balance in tatters. Avalyn's heart hammered, each beat echoing in the tight space, her body attuned to Edric's ragged breathing against her shoulder. Fear coiled in her gut, not just for her life, but for the fragile truth she had glimpsed in the lion's eyes, a realm crying out for equilibrium, not more blood. She could slip away now, leave the king to his fate and vanish into the wilds as an outcast should. But the Torca's gleam drew her gaze, its symbols whispering of destinies entwined, and empathy stirred unbidden, a reluctant ache for the man who had condemned her, yet now bled for choices not unlike her own. The assassins fanned out, one kicking at the fire pit, sending sparks spiraling like dying stars. Smell that. Blood and female. Close. Edric shifted, his free hand brushing hers in the dark, a silent vow of protection that ignited something visceral in her chest. She met his eyes, steel-gray depths shadowed by pain, and saw the guilt mirrored back. Not the tyrant's mask, but a soul adrift, marked by losses that echoed her rejection. In that gaze, curiosity deepened to understanding. He had cast her into the den not from hatred, but from the terror of truths that might unmake him. When the nearest assassin lunged toward their hiding spot, drawn by a loose pebble dislodged under Edric's foot, Avalyn acted. Her Pathfinder's gift surged, not as vision, but as intuition, a surge of the wild's own fury. She whispered the oath's fragment under her breath, her free hand pressing against the stone wall. The ice there cracked with a sharp report, a hidden fissure widening into a cascade of frozen shards that rained down like the Deuce's judgment. The assassin staggered back, cursing as jagged ice sliced his arm, blood blooming dark against the white. Edric seized the moment, bursting from the crevice with a roar that shook the cavern, primal and alpha true despite his weakness. His dagger flashed in the moonlight, catching the second intruder's throat in a swift arc, hot blood spraying across the stone like spilled wine. The third wheeled, blade raised, but Avalyn was there, grabbing a fallen torch from the pit, its embers flaring to life in her grip. She swung it low, the flames licking at the assassin's legs, forcing him to leap back into the shadows. Edric finished him with a desperate lunge, the blade sinking home, but not before the foe's knife grazed his already wounded side, tearing a fresh gash. They collapsed against the wall as silence fell, broken only by their heaving breaths and the drip of blood pooling on the frost. The air reeked of singed fur and copper, the moonlight now staining red as it touched the fallen. Edric slumped, his face ashen, but his hand found hers again, gripping with a strength born of gratitude. "You could have run," he murmured, voice hoarse, eyes searching hers in the afterglow of battle. "Why fight for a king who damned you?" Avalyn's pulse thrummed, the bond solidifying in the shared heat of exertion, the empathy that had flickered now a steady flame, warming the void of her exile. She tore a strip from her shift, pressing it to his wound, her touch gentle yet firm, feeling the tremor in his frame. The act was intimate, visceral, the scent of his blood mingling with hers from the earlier cuts, binding them in the language of survival. "Because the balance demands more than vengeance," she replied, her voice soft against the cavern's echo, philosophy threading through the pain. "What is strength, if not choosing to mend what duty breaks? Your guilt. It mirrors my rejection. We are both outcasts in this fracture." He nodded, wincing as she tied the makeshift bandage, the silver torque brushing her wrist like a promise. The connection deepened, resisted no longer, rationalized as alliance, yet felt in the quiet press of his forehead to hers, a moment of raw vulnerability under the moon's watchful eye. Empathy bloomed into something profound, a spiritual tether, her as the priestess unveiling truths, him as the king seeking redemption's path. But as distant weavos rose from the tunnels, more pursuers perhaps, or the wild answering the bloodshed, Avalyn felt the dilemma settle like winter's weight. To bind herself to him was to embrace a destiny of war and forgiveness, or flee into solitude, leaving the realm to rot. The torse's runes seemed to pulse brighter, urging choice amid the gathering storm. In the refuge's fragile hush, with blood and fire as witnesses, the first threads of their union wove tight, redemption not as reward, but as the arduous proof of souls reclaiming what was lost. The cavern's hush deepened as the embers in the fire pit sputtered their last, casting erratic shadows that clawed at the ice-veined walls like the remnants of forgotten oaths. Avalyn's hands trembled faintly as she secured the bandage around Edric's side, the fabric of her shift now ragged and stained, absorbing the warmth of his blood like parched earth drinking rain. The metallic tang lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid smoke and the faint wild musk of the lion's distant echoes above. Her skin prickled under the moon's slanted gaze, filtering through the ceiling's fissures in silver shards that painted his face in stark relief. Guilt's hollows deeper now, etched by the night's toll. She pulled back, her breath a visible plume in the chill, and met his eyes. They held hers, unyielding yet fractured, the alpha's instinct warring with the man's vulnerability. The touch of his forehead to hers moments ago had lingered, a bridge of heat across the void, but now doubt crept in like frost creeping over stone. What madness bound her to this king, whose decree had hurled her into fang and shadow? The Pathfinder's whisper stirred within her, not as a gentle guide, but a rising tide, pulling at the edges of her vision. Flashes of branching paths, rivers poisoned black under a blood moon, and a throne crumbling into snow-swept ruin. She blinked it away, rationalizing the surge as exhaustion's cruel jest, but the silver torque at his throat gleamed brighter, its lunar runes awakening like veins pulsing with intent. Edric shifted against the wall, wincing as the movement tugged at his wounds, fresh crimson seeping through her makeshift binding. The balance, he echoed her words from earlier, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, carrying the weight of unspoken confessions. You speak of it as if it's alive, priestess, as if the Deusa herself breathes in your veins. His hand rose, fingers brushing the torque absent-mindedly, the metal cool against his fevered skin. It was the ancient relic, forged in the first lunar eclipse to bind the crown to the wild's rhythms, rivers flowing pure, beasts heeding the throne's call, alphas tempered by the Omega's unseen wisdom. But under his rule, it had dulled, its power siphoned by alliances with shadow pacts that twisted nature's veins for power. Guilt shadowed his gaze, a melancholy tide that mirrored her own exile's ache. Avelin's chest tightened, the air growing thick as if the cavern itself held its breath. She had always carried the gift quietly, a subtle sight that unveiled hidden trails in the wilds or destinies knotted in starlight. But here, in this underbelly womb of rock and ice, proximity to him ignited it fully, a manifestation raw and unrelenting. Her vision blurred, the world tilting as the Pathfinder's essence flooded her senses. She saw not the dim chamber, but the realm's fractured heart. Edric's past unspooling like a bloodied thread, the queen's betrayal, her throat torn by Rorik's fangs in a moonless raid, the rivers turning to venom as shadow rites poisoned the land's arteries. And woven through it all, her own thread, the outcast priestess, rejected for truths that could mend the tear. Gasping, she clutched at the stone floor, her nails scraping frost-laced grit, the cold biting into her palms like a warning. Images cascaded, lions circling a shadowed throne, their manes silver under the moon. Edric's hand extended not in command, but in surrender, the torque reforged in fire and forgiveness. She was the key, the Omega whose curse had been prophecy, not damnation, but the Deusa's hand guiding him toward redemption. The vision crested, her body arching with the force of it, a soft cry escaping her lips as the spiritual weight pressed down, wind howling faintly through unseen vents like the wild's affirmation. Edric lunged forward, his arms encircling her despite the pain lancing through his side, pulling her against his chest. The heat of him was a bulwark against the vision's chill, his heartbeat a thunderous drum echoing her own. Avelin, he murmured, the name a revelation on his tongue, stripped of titles and thrones. Fear gripped him, not for the assassin's remnants cooling on the stone, but for the fragility in her trembling form. As the vision ebbed, leaving her breathless and hollowed, he held her gaze, the Alpha's resolve cracking under the weight of what he sensed, her gift unfurling like a lunar bloom, illuminating the destiny he had fled. You see it, he whispered, his breath warm against her temple, the scent of pine and blood enveloping her like a cloak. The torque pressed between them, its runes now humming faintly, alive with the proximity of her power. The curse I bear, it's not mere guilt. Rorik's shadow rites twisted the pact. The land withers because I chose war's fragile peace over the wild's truth. But in your eyes, I see the paths, the one where I fall, and the one where balance returns. Realization dawned in his steel-gray depths, a profound shift. She was no mere survivor of his judgment, but the Deusa's chosen, the Pathfinder whose sight could realign the Torca's fractured magic, redeeming his reign through her unclaimed strength. Avelin pulled back slightly, her hands framing his face, feeling the rough stubble and the fever's flush beneath. The manifestation had stripped her bare, emotions raw as exposed nerves, the rejection's scar throbbing anew, yet kindled by purpose. Empathy for him surged, not as pity, but as shared rebirth, both marked by loss, both called to weave pain into renewal. "It's not your curse alone," she said, her voice steadying, laced with the vision's lingering poetry. "The Deusa reveals through the rejected. I am the key because I walked the den unafraid. Prophecy demands the outcast to mend the crown. But Edric, this path, it asks sacrifice. To restore the torque, we face Rorik's heart, the betrayal that birthed this fracture." His fingers traced her jaw, a touch tentative yet charged, the bond between them no longer denied but acknowledged. A spiritual tether, omega to alpha, pulling toward union's arduous proof. The moonlight intensified, bathing them in silver, the Torca's glow sinking with her quickened pulse. Yet doubt flickered in her chest, a moral rift. To embrace this was to chain her freedom to his redemption, risking the wild solitude for a throne's shadowed wars. What was destiny, if not the freedom to refuse? The wind howled louder through the tunnels, carrying weavos that spoke of gathering storms, Rorik's packs closing in, the realm's fate hanging on their entwined choices. In that suspended breath, under the moon's unblinking witness, Edric saw her truly. The priestess whose light pierced his guilt's veil, the key to unlocking not just the torque, but the soul he had buried beneath duty's ice. The revelation bound them tighter, fire and blood forging the first step toward rebirth, even as the shadows of judgment loomed, demanding they choose compassion over the throne's cold grasp. The wind clawed through the tunnels like a vengeful spirit, carrying the distant clamor of the arena's unrest, shouts fracturing into chaos above, where the crowd grappled with the lion's impossible mercy. Avelin's vision still echoed in her veins, a spectral hum that sharpened every shadow, every flicker of torchlight spilling from the fissures overhead. She rose from Edric's side, her limbs heavy with the gift's aftershock, the ragged shift whispering against her skin like a lover's regret. The silver torque at his throat pulsed with renewed vigor, its runes etching faint light into the air, a beacon that both promised and warned. They could not linger. Rorik's shadow stretched long, his assassins but the vanguard of a tide that would drown them both in the realm's poisoned currents. Edric pushed to his feet, his breath ragged, the fresh bandages stark white against the crimson stains on his cloak. Pain etched his features, but resolve hardened his jaw, the alpha's fire rekindling beneath the guilt's frost. "We face it now," he said, his voice a low forge of determination. Eyes locking on hers with an intensity that stirred the bond deeper, a pull no longer resisted, but tested in the crucible of pursuit. The Matilha gathers at the northern gates. Rorik's betrayal festers there, in the heart of what was once my pack. If we flee, the fracture widens. If we confront, the Deuce's balance may yet hold. Avalyn nodded, the Pathfinder's whisper guiding her hand to his, their fingers intertwining in the chill, a tactile vow amid the encroaching storm. Freedom tempted her still, a solitary path into the wilds where exile could bloom into quiet sovereignty, unburdened by thrones or tainted alphas. Yet the Torca's glow tugged at her soul, revealing the moral chasm. To abandon him was to let corruption claim the land, rivers blackening further, beasts turning feral against their kin. Love, if it dared name itself here, was no soft reprieve but a gauntlet, redemption forged in the choice to forgive what had scarred her, or wage war that might consume them both. They moved through the labyrinth, the stone passages narrowing into veins of the earth, slick with meltwater that dripped like blood from unseen wounds. The air grew sharper, laced with the metallic bite of approaching snow and the faint, acrid smoke of border fires. Weavos rose ahead, a chorus of the Matilha, loyalists torn between Edric's faded command and Rorik's venomous allure. Evelyn's bare feet numbed on the icy floor, each step a visceral reminder of her outcast state, the cold seeping into her bones like the rejection's lingering frost. Edric's presence anchored her, his heat a counterpoint, but doubt gnawed. Was this alliance Mercy's extension, or the Deuce's cruel jest, binding her to the very crown that had cast her down? The tunnel spat them into the undercroft of the northern gates, a vast chamber where moonlight poured through a grated skylight, silvering the frost-laced pillars like ancient sentinels. Snow swirled in eddies from cracks in the walls, the wind's howl amplifying into a symphony of unrest. There, amid the gathering pack, stood Rorik, the rival alpha, his frame lean and shadowed, eyes gleaming with the feral hunger of one who had traded balance for dominion. His fur cloak was edged in the black ichor of poisoned rites, and at his side prowled betas scarred by the same dark packs, their scents foul with rot and ambition. The Matilha encircled them, a ring of conflicted faces, some bearing fangs in loyalty to Edric's bloodline, others shifting uneasily, drawn to Rorik's promise of unchallenged power. Edric stepped forward, Evelyn at his flank, the torque flaring brighter under the moon's gaze, casting prismatic light across the snow-dusted stone. Gasps rippled through the pack, the air thickening with recognition. The king returned from the depths, the priestess who had tamed the lions at his side. Rorik's lip curled, a growl rumbling from his chest like thunder over poisoned waters. "The fallen king and his cursed oracle," he sneered, his voice oily as shadowed blood, circling them with predatory grace. "You condemned her to the den. Edric, yet here she stands, your guilt made flesh. The Matilha sees your weakness, the Deuce has forsaken you. Join me, or watch the realm burn in true balance. Mine." The words struck like fangs, reopening the wound of Evelyn's exile, her heart clenching with the visceral memory of iron gates slamming shut, the crowd's roar fading into isolation. She felt the pack's eyes on her, a tide of judgment mirroring her own past trial. Outcast once more, yet now with a king's shadow to amplify the scrutiny. Edric's hand tightened on hers, a silent anchor, but his body tensed, the alpha's instinct surging against the melancholy that had hollowed him. Guilt warred in his gaze as he faced Rorik, the betrayer who had slain his mate in a raid veiled as alliance, twisting the river's flow to fuel shadow magic. "Your balance is poison, Rorik," Edric retorted, his tone steady, laced with the philosophical weight of revelations past. "You severed the pact for power, left my queen's blood to stain the snow. The torque binds us to the wild, not your rot. Stand down, brother of the pack, or face the Deuce's verdict." Rorik laughed, a hollow bark that echoed off the pillars, summoning his betas forward in a semicircle of bared teeth and drawn blades. Snow flurried thicker, the wind whipping Evelyn's hair like whips of fate, carrying weavos that blended warning with lament. The confrontation ignited, not in full clash but in a tense dance. Betas lunging, Edric parrying with his dagger despite the pain lancing his side, blood blooming anew on his bandages. Evelyn dodged a swipe, her Pathfinder's gift flaring to reveal openings, a beta's faltering step on slick ice, another's blind spot shrouded in shadow. She struck with a fallen spear from the undercroft's debris, the wood cracking against bone, her movements fluid as the moon's tide, driven by the ethical fire now consuming her. Yet amid the fray, the dilemma crystallized, sharp as shattered ice. Rorik closed on Edric, claws raking his arm, drawing a gash that sprayed crimson arcs into the snow, staining it deep red like spilled prophecy. Evelyn could end it, her gift unveiling the rival's vulnerability, a whispered oath to shatter his shadow-tainted strength. But forgiveness flickered, a moral crossroads. War would claim lives, fracturing the Matilha further, dooming the land to endless cycle, binding her to Edric's redemption, choosing love's liberty over vengeance's chains. What was power, if not the mercy to spare the traitor and heal the realm's veins? Edric staggered, Rorik pinning him against a pillar, the torque grinding into his throat as fangs hovered near. Avalyn surged forward, her voice rising above the chaos, the oath pouring forth like lunar fire. By earth and fang, by moon and vein, the balance holds what crowns profane. The words resonated, the torque blazing, sending a shockwave through Rorik that hurled him back, his form convulsing as the poisoned magic recoiled. The pack faltered, Weavos turning to whimpers, the air humming with spiritual reckoning. Rorik rose, eyes wide with dawning terror, the betrayal's weight crashing upon him like an avalanche. But in that suspended fury, Avalyn faced Edric, her choice etched in blood and breath. Not war's easy blaze, but forgiveness's arduous forge. "We end this not with death," she declared, her voice trembling yet resolute, extending a hand to the fallen rival amid the pack's stunned silence. "But with the Deuce's truth, return to the pact, or exile yourself to the shadows you wrought." The wind howled its approval, snow veiling the chamber in white judgment as Edric met her gaze, gratitude and love's raw proof dawning in his eyes. Yet Rorik's snarl promised retaliation, the confrontation's embers far from quenched, leaving the moral rift wide. Compassion's crown or war's inevitable throne, the choice a blade poised at the realm's heart. The snow-veiled chamber pulsed with the aftermath's raw hush, the Undercroft's pillars standing as silent judges under the moon's fractured gaze. Avalyn's words lingered like incense in the frozen air, the oath's echo binding the Torca's blaze to the pack's wavering breaths. Rorik sprawled amid the flurries, his shadowed form convulsing once more before stilling, the black ichor of his rites seeping into the stone like venom retreating from light. His eyes, once feral with triumph, now flickered with the terror of unveiled truth, the Deuce's verdict stripping his illusions bare. The Matilha encircled them, Weavos fading into murmurs, their sense a turbulent mix of loyalty's pine and doubt's bitter frost, torn between the fallen king's return and the rival's poisoned allure. Avalyn's chest heaved, the spear still gripped in her blood-slicked hands, its weight a visceral anchor against the spiritual tide that had surged through her. The Pathfinder's gift hummed in her veins, not as overwhelming vision now, but as a steady current, illuminating the paths converging here, rivers clarifying under lunar thaw, beasts reclaiming their wild harmony, a throne reforged not in conquest, but in the quiet surrender of scars. Yet the choice she had voiced, forgiveness over fangs, hung precarious, a moral precipice where compassion's edge could shatter into war's abyss. Her rejection's echo throbbed anew, the arena's iron gate, a ghost in her mind, reminding her that mercy demanded her own rebirth. To heal the crown meant weaving her exile's threads into its frayed tapestry, sacrificing solitude for a union that might yet unravel them both. Edric rose unsteadily beside her, his arm brushing hers in the swirling snow, the contact a spark that grounded the chaos. Crimson trailed from his gashes, staining the frost red, but his stance radiated a renewed alpha's fire, melancholy tempered by the revelation of her as his redemption's key. The silver torque at his throat glowed steadily now, its runes syncing with her pulse, a symbolic heart binding king to priestess, wild to throne. He faced Rorik, not with blade drawn, but with open palm, the gesture heavy with the guilt he had carried like winter's yoke. "The pact endures," Edric declared, his voice resonant over the wind's lament, carrying the philosophical depth of nights spent in shadowed confession. "Not through my command, but through her truth. Exile yourself, Rorik, to the borders you poisoned. Let the Deuce's balance reclaim what your ambition severed, or face the storm you invited." Rorik pushed to his knees, a guttural snarl twisting his features, but the fight bled from him like the ichor pooling at his feet. The Shadow Right's recoil had hollowed his frame, leaving only the betrayer's core exposed. A once brother warped by power's hunger, his mate-slaying raid now a chain around his soul. He met Avalyn's gaze, the Omega's unyielding compassion a mirror to his fractures, and something cracked within, not redemption's full bloom, but the first reluctant fracture of denial. "You'd spare me," he rasped, voice laced with disbelief and the sour tang of defeat. "After I spilled royal blood to claim what was weak?" The pack shifted, betas lowering weapons, the air thickening with the scent of thawing allegiance, Weavos rising tentative as the moon crested higher. Avalyn stepped forward, the snow crunching beneath her bare feet like brittle oaths giving way, the cold a sharp counterpoint to the inner fire of her choice. Freedom whispered still, a solitary trail into the northern wilds where she could vanish as the outcast priestess, unbound by thrones or tainted loves. But the Torca's light pulled her, revealing the deeper truth. Love here was no velvet reward, but a forge of sacrifice, demanding she extend mercy to the betrayer as she had to the king, mending the realm's veins through her own scarred heart. "Weakness is the lie you sold," she replied, her tone soft yet edged with the vision's unyielding clarity, the wind whipping her hair like the Deuce's veils. "The balance heals what power breaks. Go, Rorik, carry your shadows to the fringes, and let the land forget your poison, or cling to them and become the storm's first casualty." He rose slowly, the pack parting like the lions had for her, their eyes reflecting the moral shift, not blind loyalty, but a spiritual awakening to compassion's crown. Rorik's snarl softened to a bitter laugh, hollow as echoing caverns, and he backed toward the tunnel's maw, betas trailing in wary silence. "This mercy will be your undoing, priestess. The shadows never truly fade." His form melted into the gloom, the wind swallowing his retreat, leaving the chamber to the hush of falling snow and the Matilha's tentative howls of renewed fealty. Edric turned to her then, the pack fading into respectful distance, their forms blurring in the lunar haze. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing the line of a cut from the fray, the touch intimate and charged, blood's warmth mingling with the frost's bite. Guilt's shadows lingered in his eyes, but gratitude burned brighter, the Alpha's melancholy yielding to a profound union, their bond no longer instinct's denial, but choice's deliberate weave. "You chose us," he murmured, voice thick with emotion, the Torca's glow enveloping them like a shared aura. "Not war's blaze, but healing's quiet flame. In sparing him, you've reforged me, exile to rebirth, rejection to alliance." Avalyn leaned into his palm, the contact sending ripples through her core, the Pathfinder's gift affirming the path, rivers stirring clear, the wild's harmony returning under a balanced moon. Yet sacrifice's weight settled, a spiritual ache, her freedom traded for this, the outcast's voice now echoing in the throne's halls, love as proof that redemption bloomed from pain's soil. "It's not ended," she whispered, her breath mingling with his in the swirling flakes, philosophy threading her words like silver veins. "Mercy crowns the fallen, but the storm tests its hold. What is destiny, if not the liberty to choose union over isolation?" The Matila closed ranks around them, a protective circle under the moon's approving silver. Weavos rising in harmony as the northern gates groaned open above, spilling starlight into the undercroft. Edric drew her close, their foreheads touching once more, the torque pressing between like a vow, etched in light. In that embrace, rebirth ignited, not as triumphant fanfare, but as the arduous union of souls, fire and blood witnesses to a realm's slow mending. Yet in the distant wind's howl, Rorik's parting threat lingered, a ethical shadow. Compassion's gift could yet demand further sacrifice, the balance fragile as fresh snow under claw. As they ascended toward the gates, hand in hand, the moon bathed their path in ethereal glow, the silver torque pulsing with the promise of trials to come, redemption's flame kindled but ever vigilant against the gathering dark. The ascent from the undercroft wound upward like a vein pulsing toward the heart of the realm, each step through the groaning gates a deliberate forging of fragile peace. Snow lashed against Avalyn's skin, sharp as whispered regrets, the wind's howl weaving through the iron lattice overhead like the Deuce's own lament for what had been lost. Her hand remained clasped in Edric's, the warmth of his palm a counterpoint to the frost that numbed her bare feet on the slick stone stairs. Blood from their shared wounds mingling in faint rivulets that traced crimson paths into the white drifts below. The silver torque at his throat thrummed steadily now, its lunar runes casting a soft glow that pierced the blizzard's veil, illuminating the path not as conquerors, but as pilgrims bound by choice's unyielding thread. The Matilha flanked them, their forms spectral in the swirling flakes, loyal betas with eyes reflecting the moon's silvered doubt, their uivos a tentative chorus that echoed the wild's cautious renewal. Above, the arena's chaos had spilled into the northern wilds. Torches flared along the battlements, casting erratic fires that danced like restless spirits against the night sky, the crowd's distant roar fracturing into awestruck murmurs as word of the lion's mercy and the king's return rippled outward. Avalyn's heart clenched with the weight of it all, the Pathfinder's gift stirring faintly within her, a final vision unfolding not in blinding cascade, but in quiet certainty. Rivers stirring from their poisoned slumber, beasts lifting heads to a balanced moon, the torque reforged in the fire of forgiveness. Yet the images carried a shadow, Rorik's retreating form a specter on the horizon, his exile a seed that might yet bloom into storm. They emerged onto the frost-shrouded ramparts, the wind whipping fiercer, carrying the metallic tang of impending snow and the faint, acrid smoke of border pyres lit against encroaching shadows. Edric paused at the threshold, his breath steaming in plumes that mingled with hers, his free hand rising to trace the torque's edge, the metal humming against his fingertips like a living vow. Guilt's melancholy lingered in the lines of his face, etched deeper by the night's toll. But his steel-gray eyes held hers with a profound clarity. The Alpha's ethical core, once buried under duty's ice, now bared in redemption's raw light. "This union," he murmured, voice low against the gale, "it asks everything of us, my crown, your freedom, sacrificed not to power, but to the balance we both bled for. Are you certain, Avalyn? The wild calls to you still. I would not chain what the Deusa set free." The question pierced her like a fang's graze, stirring the embers of her exile's ache, the arena's iron seal, the lion's parting gaze, the rejection that had carved her into something unbreakable. Freedom tempted, a solitary trail vanishing into the blizzard's embrace where she could wander as the outcast priestess, her gift unbound by thrones or the melancholy weight of a king's shadowed heart. Love in this lunar crucible was no gentle bloom but a tragic forge. Resisted in the den's shadows, rationalized in the cavern's refuge, now accepted as the arduous proof of souls entwined. She felt it in the press of his hand, the torch's warmth radiating through them both, binding Omega to Alpha in a spiritual union that transcended hierarchy. Redemption, not as reward, but as the mutual healing of fractures long denied. Avalyn stepped closer, the snow clotting in her unbound hair like frozen stars, her voice emerging steady, laced with the philosophy that had guided her through fang and frost. "Certainty is the Deusa's illusion," she replied, her free hand rising to cup his jaw, thumb brushing the stubble roughened by nights of torment. "What is rebirth, if not choosing the chain that mends? Your guilt, my rejection, they were the storm's prelude. Together, we are the calm that follows, the torque's light restoring what Rorik's shadows stole." The words sealed it, a quiet oath of their own, the Pathfinder's whisper affirming the path. sacrifice of solitude for shared vigilance, her hidden sight unveiling the realm's veins, his ethical resolve tempering the crown's cold grasp. In his eyes, she saw the acceptance mirror hers, melancholy yielding to hope's tentative flame, the Alpha's heart opening to the Omega, who had walked unafraid through his darkest decree. The Matilha gathered closer, their forms a living barrier against the wind's assault, Uivos rising in full harmony now, a lunar hymn that drowned the distant echoes of unrest. Edric drew her into his arms, the embrace fierce yet tender, his cloak enveloping her against the blizzard's bite, the scent of pine and blood enveloping her like home's long-forgotten warmth. Their lips met then, not in passion's blaze, but in union's solemn seal, a kiss tasting of salt and frost, blood and renewal, the torque pressing between them like the Deuce's blessing. Fire kindled in her core, visceral and profound, the bond solidifying under the moon's gaze, no immediate rapture, but the slow burn of love as proof, healing the wounds of past and present in a shared heartbeat. Yet as they turned toward the heart of the realm, the silver torque pulsing brighter, a final shadow stirred on the horizon, Rorik's pax massing in the wilds, his exile a brewing tempest that tested mercy's hold. The choice lingered, an ethical vigil. Compassion's crown demanded they stand as one against the gathering dark, their union the flame that would either illuminate or consume. Snow fell thicker, veiling the path ahead in white promise. The wind's howl softening to a whisper, as if the wild itself bowed to their rebirth. In the moon's ethereal embrace, Avalyn and Edric stepped forward, hand in hand, the outcast and the king reborn. Not as rulers unchallenged, but as guardians of a balance fragile and fierce, where love's redemption wove pain into eternal light. The realm stirred beneath them, rivers whispering clear, beasts answering the call, the torque's glow a beacon against the night. And in that spiritual dawn, sacrifice bloomed into union, the Deuce's verdict etched in blood and starlight. From rejection's depths, true strength rose, not in power's grasp, but in the mercy that crowned the fallen. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.